So this is what you get. It's so
Well,
messy.
that's good to know. We'll take care of it. Hey guys, what's going on? Today's September 14th, and it is Thursday, and you guys are listening and watching to the Daily AI Show Live. Tonight we got part of the crew. We don't have everybody. Jimmy and Robert are out at the moment. Carl was just telling us as he came in, we get the standard definition if you happen to be watching us on video and not listening to us. You got the standard. You got what we're getting, Carl. I feel like is a behind the scenes look. We got some lights, we got some shadows. I like it.
We got a window.
You know,
it's in a basement.
It is my basement.
I get it. You know, I mean, there's like, listen, this is a tailored look right here. Anything outside of this space right here or this way starts to get messy and stuff like that. So I'm always really, really aware in this room of what's just outside of camera view, you know? Anyway, today we are here to talk about hallucinations and prompt drift and all the fun things that go along with that. And I think a lot of people, you know, to start this conversation off, I think a lot of people kind of know what a hallucination is at this point, maybe not. So that's probably a good place to start. And then probably the lesser known one or term would be prompt drift. And honestly, I'd love to ask you guys too as we get into this, but prompt drift is one of those things where I first learned about the term from the AI exchange. I heard Rachel Woods talking about it. But it can have some other meanings and definitions as well. I think there's sort of a micro definition of prompt drift and then sort of a macro definition. So anyway, we can get into that. But I think maybe the place to start here are hallucinations. And hallucinations, just a very simple way of saying that is that large language models like ChatGPT, they're certainly not the only one, Claude, Pi, all of them, can and will lie, but I think the word I really like that goes along with this is they will lie convincingly. They will to the death they're telling you the truth. My wife and I had a really funny, I guess, conversation one time with Pi. If you don't know Pi, it's mostly made for a mobile. I'm not sure what their desktop version looks like, but we've all talked about it before. It's great for just having conversations back and forth, brainstorming. It's actually really cool. It talks back to you. You can talk to it, so you're not typing the whole time. And my wife and I had this whole long conversation and then asked Pi simply, hey, can you turn this into like a PDF or something like that we wanted, some sort of file. We were pretty sure Pi couldn't do that, but I was like, hey, let's ask. Maybe Pi will come back and say, sure, here's a link to download the whatever. Pi's like, got it, no problem. I mean, convincingly got it, no problem. So we wait a little bit, and then I come back to Pi, and I'm like, hey, Pi, or hey, how's that download coming? I mean, Pi comes back. I wish I had saved it. Pi comes back, and she was speaking in an English accent. She comes back, and she's like, look, still working on it, taking me a little bit longer to get this done, but I want to do it right for you. And so I just need a little more time. And I was like, okay, fine. I'm kind of laughing with my wife. My wife's like, this is ridiculous. Go away, come back like 4 hours later. Hey, how's that download going on? Still working on it. It's almost there. Put in the final. I mean, it was convincing that it was on top of this. So much so that we were like, man, this is like working with like, you know, somebody you've hired, and you're like, how's that project going along? And they're like, on it, boss, no problem at all. Last couple things, throwing the last couple emojis in there. It was ridiculous. It was the most extreme version of hallucinating I've ever seen in my life. So 4 days goes by, and I think to go back in there just to see if anything's changed. And I say to this Pi, I say, I don't think you're capable of doing this. And it would just be easier if you told me the truth and that you're not capable. It's fine. That's what I say right now. I'm like playing to it. It's fine. Then it came back and said, you know what? You're right. I just wanted to try to do what you were asking for. Yeah. And but you're right. I have no capabilities in creating like a downloadable file or whatever. I should have just told you the truth at the beginning. I was like, what is going on? So that's my story of hallucination. We've all seen it, but that's like an extreme version of it. And it was, as much as it was funny because we knew it was lying all along, we were fairly certain there was no way it could do this task. Obviously, that type of scenario could wreak havoc for a business or a person who doesn't know that might happen. So anyway, that's a good place to jump off. What stories do you guys have about hallucinations?
So you go, Beth. I'll go after you.
It's important to remember in all of this that what it's doing is probability completion. right? So when you say, can you do this? High probability is that the completion should be yes, happy to do so. That's not that it knows what it's saying. And in fact, it doesn't know what it's saying when it's not hallucinating, right? Like what my challenge with the phrase hallucination is that to a certain extent, it's always hallucinating. It's just we only call it that when it is not grounded in fact and like works for us.
That's really interesting. It's almost like mathematically, it's a mathematical problem more than it's a fact versus non-fact. Because I like what you just said, Beth. Like, it doesn't know the difference. It only knows what it should perhaps respond with as the most probable solution. But it doesn't know that it's right or wrong.
People have got to remember it's basically an autocomplete, like you have on your phone for your Messenger or your SMS or something like that. That's kind of at a really base level what it is. So yeah, it doesn't always get it right. So it certainly doesn't actually think like we expect it to. So
right. And Pi may be the best example because I also have a Pi story. I tend to stop when I think. Because I have a new thought coming in. I don't have language for it yet. And it would automatically like then start talking and it would say, hey, it sounds like you didn't complete that thought. Would you like to? And I'm like, like what's happening? I'm aware of that too. And so I said, is there a setting? And it said, absolutely. This is where it is. You go to this, right? Like, so I then send a help email saying, hey, I can't find this thing that Pi, there's some setting apparently. And they're like, yeah, no.
You know, it's like you're holding a smoking gun too. Cause it's like my daughter when she was 5, you know, like a lot of little kids do. And she was like 5 or 4, something like that. Lipstick all over the face, holding the lipstick in her hand. Sophia,
wasn't me, Dad.
Did you grab mom's lipstick and write it all over your face? No. Nope. Sophia, you're holding lipstick in your hand. Did you it's okay, but did you try on mom's lipstick, your mommy's lipstick? Nope. No. Do you want to go look in the mirror and see what it looks like? Nope. It's like dealing with a 5-year-old. You're like, with all the evidence in the world, you still can't, you know, the 5-year-old wants to answer with the most probable way that they're not going to get in trouble, which is, I did not do this, even under overwhelming evidence of the contrary. You know, a child will just look at you and go, no, that wasn't me. I don't know how this happened. It wasn't me.
That's really those are examples of hallucinations that are kind of funny and benign in most respects. But blindly believing in what this confident execution of prompts is has gotten some people in the legal world in real serious trouble. So I just wanted to raise the import of hallucinations to that. So if there aren't facts, and generally speaking, there aren't specific facts in the neural network, although the prediction routines, as you say, Beth, are able to surface really broad general knowledge. But in predicting the next word or the format of the next characters that it's spitting out, if it has a lot of knowledge about what for example, a reference in a legal library looks like, it's going to generate something like that in order to be performing well. And that's happened to some lawyers who, got in trouble with the bar because they had cited cases that didn't exist. So for those of you who hadn't followed the news on that one, that's really a fascination from GPTs that is being addressed, I think, by the people who have developed these by adding additional checking routines to ensure that what is being generated actually has some foundation, a verifiable foundation outside just the internal knowledge of the large language model.
So that raises an interesting point for me, Andy, and that is, you say if the facts are not in there, it'll just make it up. but I've seen examples where the facts should, and I think they're in there, and they're still wrong. So nothing business related. The guys here on the podcast know that one of my interests is military aviation, which you can tell from the model plane kits there. So one of the things I believe is ChatGPT has got most or all of Wikipedia in it. So I went to ChatGPT at some stage, asked it a question about a specific plane, and I know the information is in Wikipedia because I've seen it, and yet it continued to give me, excuse my French, BS, no matter what I said or did to it. And the same when you go into something like Midjourney. In theory, Midjourney has been fed a zillion pictures that will, it can do something with it. You ask it to, again, going back to my interest in military aviation, ask it to give me a picture of a specific kind of plane. It almost invariably fails with it. It tries to do something else all the time. So there's still issues there. I mean, that's not a business related issue, but there's still issues there, even when the facts are there and even when it should have the information to be able to complete some tasks. So you can't rest on your laurels and assume that it's got it right just because it sounds good.
So how to reduce the likelihood that it's going to fascinate something for you is this setting that's available, in more advanced interfaces than just the ChatGPT interface, and that's called temperature. So a standard setting for temperature is around 0.7, and it's a reflection of how much variability the model is allowed to inject or insert into its routine of generating the next characters and words and paragraphs or whatever it's pursuing as instruction. And you can set that temperature up really high, and it's going to do something very creative, which is very, very much a hallucination. Maybe founded in some sensibility, but it's going to be an hallucination if you put that temperature up high. So, this is one of the things that comes out of the prompting course that Brian and Beth are both, masters of and tutors in. But you can set that temperature setting to 0, and that will reduce the likelihood that it's going to confabulate things for you.
I think the one thing that I've noticed, and this is where the rise of retrieval augmented generation, or the RAG, where all these other third-party chat bots or learning how to build your own is enabling the LLM to go to another set of knowledge that you've put in, then pull that knowledge and be able to display it, and then have the sources specifically to your data or a set of data. And I think, although there are some times when it still hallucinates, less so than, if you're just using straight up Claude or Bard or ChatGPT. But there are also temperature settings there where you go to temperature, like, the higher it is, the more it could hallucinate. But one thing that I've noticed that prevents that is actually two. First thing is, be very, very specific on what you want. Like, the more vague or open the question, the more likelihood it will hallucinate. And then two, what I've noticed using some of these chatbot tools, I always end with this, where if you do not know the answer, or if the answer is not provided in the given information, say whatever, it'd be like, I don't know, please, talk or contact this. And that I've noticed that has reduced the hallucinations on any bot that I've built. I would say maybe 1-2% of the answers are hallucinated now. And you can then be even more specific. So just making those instructions, if you use, third-party chatbots, or being very more specific in what you're asking, can help reduce that, along with what Andy was saying in terms of reducing the temperature to like 0 to 0.1.
So what's for end users out there, Andy, if the temperature is reduced to 0, what's the overall end result? So for people who haven't used that before, what kind of difference does it make? Does it become very literal, or how does it work?
Yeah, it's zero variability in the answer. So the example that again Rachel showed me months ago inside the OpenAI playground is, if you set it to 0 and you say the best pet to have is, it'll respond a dog. And then no matter how many times you hit that button, if it's set to 0, it'll say a dog, a dog, a dog, a dog, right? And then if you add in variability, it might say something like a giraffe, depending on how far up you go into the variability, and it'll change an answer again. But at 0, it's not really adding any flavor to the response of the conversation. It really should just be pulling back strictly the raw data facts of what it is you're looking for down at 0. So, it's creativity is another way to think of it, but variability is what they usually say for it as well. So that was the example that sort of, she showed me that in the playground, and it always made sense to me. And you can actually, if for those who have access to the playground, you can go test that out as well. And it's not, I'm going to look really quick because it's not the chat side. It's in the complete side of the playground. So for anybody that might know this stuff, if you go over into the OpenAI playground, you have some options on the right-hand side. Number one, you can set temperature anywhere you want, which is great. You can pick your model from ChatGPT 4 to 3.5 and other ones, but you can also, there's some older versions in there outside of chat that you can also use. And that's one way you could actually test it. I had two things. One, I want to make sure we get the prompt drift before we get too late into this show. But Andy, you made me think of something, and this is for everybody. But as we deal with plugins and we see ChatGPTs of the world, and they're probably the primary one right now, but we're going to see it more and more integrated into other systems. I wonder and I worry about a system that can still hallucinate. And I'm thinking about next week when I'm going to be on my way to catch a flight. Well, when that happens, obviously right now I can go to Google Maps and say, based on traffic, am I there? But if we, and I imagine we will, start to integrate more of these natural language models into our daily tasks, what are the fears of something like that saying, when I say, hey, am I on track to get to my flight on time? And because it wants me to be on time, and in fact tells me I am, and then I miss a flight. Or you can throw in any other variable or scenario into that as well. I do worry, based on what you're saying, Andy, about as these are being brought into more other third-party systems, will the effects of hallucination be felt more broadly by the public?
I think that's what's preventing it, though, from being used. Like, I think that's one of the kind of hesitations from a lot of people from using it as they would a Google or even a Bing, is that, can you be 100% sure, even if it's connected online? I don't know, right?
And that gets to the point where we have made assumptions that also may not be true, right? The fact that Google has something in its search rankings should mean that the information on the page is true, but they're not actually vetting, like it's not a ranking in order of truth, right?
But we assume it is nowadays after all these years.
And Google has released its generative search, SGE maybe, or whatever that is. And so now there's one place removed. It can, like, you can click, Bing does this too. You can click to see what sources they pulled from, but it's now one place removed. You're just looking at a footnote, and if you want to go check, you can click them.
Yeah, and that's definitely going to come up on another topic. I know, Carl, you brought up that before. Robert's brought it up. That's going to be a topic for a whole day, because I think, Carl, you were sharing stats on that we'll get into in the data about reduction in people going to sites and all the things that go along with that, which is amazing. All right, look, we got about 10 minutes left, so let's talk a little bit. Let's switch over to prompt drift. We talked about hallucinations. Prompt drift, an easy way to say it is when, a conversation or model veers off topic a little bit, aka the term drift, or deviates from the original prompt. And there's several different reasons this can happen. one of the most common ones that people may not realize is that, you know, if you're in a thread, meaning you're in one conversation for ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, there's a certain amount of memory that goes along with that thread. And maybe it's a misconception to think, well, if I'm in this thread, anything I say in this thread will be relevant or used as part of this chat. And that's not true. It is up to a point. Claude has a longer version. ChatGPT is shorter than that. But at some point, you will tax the limits of that thread, and it can cause responses to deteriorate or drift. Even if they don't deteriorate, they sometimes drift. I've seen this multiple times in Claude, even though Claude has a huge memory comparatively. I've seen it many times in there where if you ask for a lot of information, it will just simply not be able to continue to give you the high quality of responses that you had at the top of it. And then so the solution there is to start a new thread and then start again. You know, sometimes I find I can say reference back, and I can pull it back in to get it to point to certain areas. So that's one way, but there's also other ways too, like just model limitations. Models change all the time and how they're being changed. So, you know, we don't have a GPT-5 yet, but I imagine we will at some point, now 2024, some point. And when that model shifts and changes, it's a very real likelihood that some of your best performing prompts will all of a sudden not work as well in GPT-5. We see this between 3.5 and 4. So there's a model issue. And to just throw one more out before we open it up to you guys, you have sort of the problems that go along with like ambiguity, which is back to what you were saying, Carl. It sort of lines into that. Be really specific about what you're asking for. If you start to become more ambiguous as you're getting through the prompt, again, to Beth's point, it's only trying to guess the next best answer. And if you're not giving it really, really great inputs, it may take that conversation in a different direction. So those are kind of the same things. Some of the things I think of a prompt check, but what do you guys think of, or do you have a different definition for it?
I'll say that more concerning to me than just within session variations that I can address by starting a new thread are production prompts that you build into an operating system that over time, you know, drift away from the performance that you expected. And the first issue is, how do you know? Because a lot of that output that's being generated by the model is being presented outside of your observation. So there's a need immediately for some feedback loop that's going to let you know when the prompts are not, producing the right results for the users.
Right. And that's actually part of the course as well, as a recommendation on evaluating and some suggestions on how to evaluate, right? A sheet that helps you run your prompts through evaluation. But it's a real problem, Andy, what you're talking about. Like the benefit, one of the benefits of doing this and creating really great, reliable prompts is that then you can automate several steps and you only have to have a human. Let's say you're generating an email, right? Andy left. I'm still talking to everybody else.
Yeah, he was not having trouble with his system, I think.
So let's say you're generating an email and you have a couple analysis generations in between. And you evaluate it at the email, you're trusting that the analysis was accurate, right? Or relatively close enough. And that can, yeah.
And I think this goes back to another really great point for anybody listening is another way to combat this. Again, goes back to what Carl was saying as well, which is that, try to stay away from what we would call a mega prompt, a prompt that tries to accomplish too many things at once, because number one, it's very, very hard to figure out where it broke or where it's not working. You have so many variables in the system that as putting a scientific method into it, how do you figure out which one you start with and which one you try to fix or whatever? So that's one problem with it. So you should always, if you have several things that you need ChatGPT or a language model system to do for you, you should break that down into small pieces and small asks one at a time, because number one, that's going to allow it to be more specific. Carl, to your point, but also Beth, to your point, like that also allows it to be for you to figure out pretty quickly, like, is this in fact this response correct? Because now you only have to think about, is it correct to this one thing I asked for, as opposed to maybe 10 in a really long prompt. And it confuses the model, quite frankly. It makes it harder for the systems and models to give back really accurate answers. Also, and Beth and I talk about this all the time in our in the class that we co-lead, is that breaking it down to smaller prompts is always a good idea anyway, because that is in fact how you would turn those into automations down the road. So something to think about, sort of beyond the context and scope of what we're talking about today, but definitely something to think about, because you are going to have prompt drift, like Andy was saying. It does happen to companies, but if they're smaller individual tasks, it is going to be easier to go and put those evaluations back into the system, or just the human in the loop to test each individual piece. Because if all you know is it's broken at the end, where do you go? It's just broken, okay, well, where is it broken? If we chop that up into smaller pieces, it does make it much, much easier to go in and figure out what parts of maybe that automation are causing the problem. And maybe there's just a small tweak that needs to happen, as opposed to some large wholesale, rip and replace type thing or whatever. And I don't know if Carl, maybe, if you run into that with what you're building with clients or not.
There was one thing that, just to add to what you're talking about, and I keep forgetting what the term is. So when you ask whatever model you're using, when you say, think about the step by step. And there was a really neat, when I was watching Anthropics, when they had their prompt, it was a really quick video, but if you have ChatGPT Plus and you're using what was called Code Interpreter, now Advanced Data Analysis, I believe, it would actually show you, if you click down on the arrow once you've finished your prompt, it would show you that, like how it's working through, I believe it's a Python. But if you actually put in, think through this step by step, and it was really neat where in the prompt you say, with the reply, plan how you would answer within the XML tags thinking, closed thinking. This space is for you to plan and write down relevant content, and then the steps you're taking. This will not be shown to users, whatever that, if you want to put that end. But what it'll do, exactly like Code Interpreter, you'll see how it's actually doing this step by step by step by step by step. And then the final, to finish the prompt, it goes, once you're done thinking, output the final answer to the user within the XML tag answer, close answer, make sure the answer is detailed and specific. I thought that was a really neat way. If you want something to be I don't know if it prevents prompt drift, but you can see all the steps it's going through, and it forces it to actually show you, and maybe forces it to actually go through step by step, which may decrease the likelihood of your prompt, not working as well. So I thought it's an extra tool that you can always copy and paste in to just ensure that your prompt, that it's actually doing it step by step rather than just providing you an answer.
You got me thinking, Carl. I want to put this in the real quick. You got me thinking. I want to take that and put that into the custom instructions on the bottom box of the custom instructions for ChatGPT, because I think that will be interesting to do that test and see what kind of answers it gets back if it's appending those instructions a la advanced data analysis on the ChatGPT responses. So it sounds exactly like it should go in that bottom box, which is ChatGPT saying, how do you want me to respond? And maybe it's, I want you to respond, but when you do, you have to lay it out every single time. So anyway, go ahead, Aaron. And then I'm going to throw up the TLDR. I know Jimmy's not here, but Aaron, go ahead. And if anybody wants to do any wrap up stuff, we can do that as well.
So I think at the end of the day, that the appeal or the attraction of tools like ChatGPT is that you can get it to do what appears to be maybe magic to some people. So and I've seen some really crazy prompts out there that people use both for GPT and also for Midjourney, for example, The problem is if you go big and fancy, as you guys said, you can't break down and find out where the problem is. In the marketing world, we use something called, you might have heard the term split testing. We're trying to find out what kind of words and what kind of offer and maybe what kind of layout of the page works. But you don't just throw all the elements in at once and run them. You've got to do each of them and segment them so you can figure out where the breakpoints are. So just a little something to think about when you're using these kind of tools is, don't try and be too fancy, because sometimes you're just going to shoot yourself in the foot.
Perfect. Who else has got one? Any other lasting parting TLDR thoughts here? We've had a lot of them.
What I started with, it's always hallucinating. Like, it's just benevolently hallucinating most of the time.
Benevolently hallucinating.
And I'll add that the hallucinations are beautiful. Generally speaking, what you get when you put any prompt in there is something worthy of a draft, right? You got to think of it as a draft. You're going to have to examine it carefully and test it for validity. But it's really amazing to me what you can get out of these models. The complexity, the instruction following capabilities is just amazing to me still.
Yep,
I'll piggyback real quick on what Aaron said, because it just made me think of the acronym, but it's, the old acronym KISS, right? Keep it simple, stupid. That's a great way to go about writing prompts. The more complex you try to get, the bigger you try to get with them, the more problems you could perhaps run into. And so staying super specific with it, keeping it simple, not trying to be too heady with it or creative, a lot of times is going to give you better answers. And Carl, you got any last ones on this? Or I don't know if I missed anybody too.
Oh, just for me, the last one is be specific in what you're asking it, and like think it through. That's really when you're asking anything, just think it through, be specific, and that's kind of it.
Yeah. I love it.
Have fun.
Well, anything else? We good?
We're good.
Last call. All right. Well, hopefully everybody that was, listening to this today, if you didn't know what hallucinations are, and more likely maybe you didn't know what prompt drift was, because it's not as common of a term. Hopefully this has helped you out. Don't forget, you can catch us live every weekday at 10 a.m. on LinkedIn Live and YouTube as well. You should also find this on replays on places like Spotify and YouTube and LinkedIn and other places that we're expanding as far as our podcast network goes. So until tomorrow, we'll be back for Aloha Friday, holding down the fort, and we will see you then. See you, everybody.
Bye.
Happy Thursday.